Well, this newer literature, mostly qualitative, but not only, on civil wars, begins to investigate the mechanisms connecting the structural background of civil wars and their outcomes. And that's music to the ears of somebody like myself who's been focusing on mechanisms and processes.
But there's also another important lesson I think you can derive from that story, and that is that let's say that the actual mechanism when you discover it is the remoteness, the difficulty of getting troops into that area. There are many other factors that produce that same obstacle, and therefore, basically, I'm thinking a statistical thought. You should expect a very weak correlation between mountains and the outcome, simply because there are many other pathways of getting that particular causal influence into the outcome. Mm-hmm. That, in other words, and for me, that's a very deep fact about social contingency. It's a deep fact about why the Correlates of War project should not be expected to be successful. Mm-hmm. It is that because there are multiple pathways, you shouldn't expect strong correlations between kind of gross variables, input variables and output variables. Mm-hmm. In other words, once you understand the metaphysics, the ontology, I don't mean a fancy word, once you kind of understand how social movements work, and you understand that there are 3 or 4 large variables. You mentioned community solidarity, mountain communities being more solidary possibly. You mentioned also the armed capacity of the state. Mm-hmm. But each of those kind of intermediate level factors can be influenced by many different social variables in different social settings.
That's right. This is why you can have civil wars in desert countries, because the mechanism may be the same, even though the mountains are absent.
But this is now a devastating blow to the idea that the social sciences should be like epidemiology.
That's right.
Or like chemistry, looking for gross correlations. Do this gigantic database that you were describing for the civil wars, and then if you crunch it hard enough, you'll find what the causes are. Mm-hmm. But that's incorrect once you understand the multiple kind of causal mechanism pathways that exist.
I would say it's less incorrect than incomplete, because the same logic that enables people to crunch vast data sets also enables them to crunch smaller data sets. And it may be, and this is already being done, it may be that one can theoretically segment those vast data sets into theoretically more logical ones and analyze the data quantitatively and come up with more robust results.
Exactly. And one way of doing that in the case that you just mentioned is if there are, let's say that there are 10 different characteristics that are in some way or other related to the difficulty of moving troops around. If you can code all of those as being similar in that respect, there should be a much higher correlation with that meta group, larger group of variables, to the outcome.
That's right.
But then that requires theory. It requires that you have a theory about why it is that remoteness is relevant to the occurrences of the war.
The work of my friend Nicholas Sambanis at Yale is a second generation quantitative analysis of Civil War data, which illustrates this point. Sambanis grew out of the first generation work. He had worked at the World Bank with Collier, who had done the initial econometric work. And then he convinced Collier, again with World Bank support, to carry out and commission a large number of qualitative studies to test the Collier findings. And they found that the Collier findings worked some places and they didn't work other places. And unlike Collier, who continued to run the same data set with slightly tinkering in with the variables and with the data, Sambanis then moved on to a more theoretically inspired analysis of certain kinds of civil wars. He was interested in secessionist movements, and so he took a somewhat smaller data set and developed quantitative analysis around it, informed by the qualitative work that had been done in between the first wave and the second wave. So here again, I think I'm sounding like a broken record, iterative progress is based on a willingness to read and to profit from different kinds of research. And Sambanis's evolution from a more crude form of large data set analysis into a more refined and more theoretically inspired form of a data set analysis because of what he learned from the qualitative analysis that had come in between, is my idea of progress in the social sciences.
Now I think that's just a great description.